Front of mind for all of us as we head towards the summer is, what does American life look like while the pandemic is still out there as a threat and we, for a variety of reasons, just cannot continue an indefinite, multiple months long shelter in place, right? And that question is a hard one. I mean, we've covered it on the show night after night after night. There's various competing policy imperatives and risk assessments and questions about what's the best way to go forward. It's complicated, but it's not, or it shouldn't be, a culture war question of rhetoric and values and symbols. It's not like the controversy over whether people should stand for the national anthem and what it means if they don't. And yet that is the way that the president and Trump TV and his allies have been trying to portray it. And so what we get are situations like the hair salon in Texas, where the owner was sent to jail for keeping her business open, and she became a celebrated figure. And then Senator Ted Cruz makes a show of going there to get his haircut in solidarity. Or this completely wild scene in Colorado on Mother's Day, which I honestly didn't believe when I first saw it. A restaurant packed with customers having breakfast. Now, on the spectrum of risky behavior, this is really up there. I mean, close quarters, indoors, a whole ton of strangers, no masks in sight. And you might not be surprised to learn that the restaurant that opened this way tweeted on Saturday, quote, "We are standing for America, small businesses, the Constitution, and against the overreach of our governor in Colorado." The problem for people waging this deranged and self-defeating culture war is that it remains the case that the overwhelming majority of people are not taking crazy risks and do not want to get sick. Thankfully. The big thing restraining commerce in this country is not the governors, it's the virus. We saw this before the lockdowns even started, where restaurant activity plummeted before the restaurants were closed, right? The bold orange line on this graph shows that the median percent change in restaurant reservations from last year. And the dotted vertical line is when restaurants close. And you can see it just starts plummeting days ahead of the lockdown orders. That's people being like, maybe going to skip a restaurant. They changed their behavior before the government required them to. And we're seeing a very similar pattern on the back end, right? This is the same year-over-year reservation data. It's in Tennessee and Texas and Georgia, 3 states that have started reopening, although with all sorts of restrictions and conditions, particularly in Texas. You can only have 25% of the people there. But you can see that it's not like people are racing back into restaurants. There's not much of an uptick at all. People are still choosing to stay home. They're choosing to comport themselves as if there was a deadly pandemic raging. Because most people do not buy this culture war vision. They're making sensible assessments of the risk. Well, the president is trying to march the country into a situation where, honestly, we could end up with the worst of both worlds, right? You have high-risk events as some kind of symbolism, like the Colorado restaurant, that really do serve as places the virus can spread or super spread. But you also don't have any actual sustained return to economic normalcy. For more on the manufactured coronavirus culture war, I'm joined now by Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey. And Senator, there are sort of different categories of policies that you encounter as a politician, right? There's stuff that's kind of technical and in the weeds and doesn't feel like this kind of front level culture war stuff. And then there's the intense things that people have very strong feelings about that seem to represent their values or their backgrounds. And it does seem to me like this question should be in the former category, and there are people trying to put it in the latter category. And how do you understand this problem we all collectively face?
Look, I just don't think we're as different as some of our politicians want to make us feel in this country. We all have a lot of concerns right now. As you said, most Americans want us to err on the side of public health and safety. But we also understand the urgency. Look, I know businesses up and down the state of New Jersey that are fearful. They spent their lives building in the tourist towns of Cape May and the small mom and pop restaurants in Bergen County, New Jersey. There's an urgency to save those businesses. But this is about health. This is about science. This is about data. It's not about our opinion. It's not about our politics. It's about what is the best way to get this country back to business. Because if we open up too early and we have a second wave, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be more damning to our businesses and to our economy, and on top of that, our health. So we've just got to stop this nonsense. And Chris, this is what makes this being a moment that we have the most uniquely unqualified president in our history. At a time we want someone to give us like a fireside chat or to appeal malice towards none, charity towards all, at a time we want us to be called together to common cause and common purpose. We have a president that is doubling down on demeaning and degrading and divisiveness, who's injuring the soul of our country, turning us against each other, tweeting out the most obnoxiously damaging imaginable tweets like "liberate states." This is not about his petty culture war. This is about the strength and health and well-being of a nation.
Well, part of it strikes me is that he doesn't. I think a fireside chats sound nice and aspirational. I would just take like actual understanding of how communicable diseases work, which also seems to be absent in this case. But it's also the case that he really, I think, does view everything about the election and about him personally. And so I thought it was very revealing for him to tweet that governors are trying to keep their states closed, like to screw me on my reelection. And I think it just doesn't. It is impossible for him to imagine that there are people literally trying to just do the right thing here and protect public health, and they're just not thinking about that. There's no governor in America that's thinking one way or the other about Donald Trump's reelection when they're thinking about their state.
Look, in a time when this administration is fighting transparency and oversight, the one thing that's been utterly transparent from the beginning of this is that Donald Trump cares about himself. He tells us that fact. You know, he didn't want to let people off of a cruise ship in the beginning because it hurt the numbers and how he looks. This is a guy that tweets out very transparently that everything is about him, what people say about him. Is this governor being nice to him? Are they plotting to get him? This is not about him. This is about the greatest national crisis in generations and how we are 5% of the globe's population. But because of a failure of leadership, we have roughly a third of the cases on the planet Earth right now.